A Wayside Comedy by Rudyard Kipling. Because to every purpose there is time and judgment, therefore the misery of man is great upon him. Eccles Roman 8. Fate and the government of India have turned the station of Kashmir into a prison, and because there is no help for the poor souls who are now lying there in torment, I write this story praying that the government of India may be moved to scatter the European population to the four winds. Kashmir is bound on all sides by the rock-tipped circle of the Dosri hills in spring. It is ablaze with roses in summer, the roses die. And the hot winds blow from the hills in autumn, the white mists from the hills cover the place as with water. And in winter the frosts nip everything young and tender to earth level. There is but one view in Kashmir, stretch of perfectly flat pasture and ploughland, running up to the grey-blue scrub of the Dosri hills. There are no amusements except snipe and tiger shooting, but the tigers have been long since hunted from their lairs in the rock caves, and the snipe only come once a year. Narkare on 143 miles, by roadies the nearest station to Kashmir, but Kashmir never goes to Narkara, where there are at least 12 English people. It stays within the circle of the Dosri hills. All Kashmir acquits Mrs. Vansithen of any intention to do harm, but all Kashmir knows that she and she alone brought about their pain. Bolt the engineer, Mrs. Bolt, and Captain Curl know this. They are the English population of Kashmir, if we accept Major Vansithen, who is of no importance whatever, and Mrs. Vansithen, who is the most important of all. You must remember, though you will not understand, that all laws weaken in a small and hidden community, where there is no public opinion. When a man is absolutely alone in a station, he runs a certain risk of falling into evil ways. The risk is multiplied by every addition to the population, up to 12th jury number. After that, fear and consequent restraint begin, and human action becomes less grotesquely jerky. There was deep peace in Kashmir till Mrs. Vansithen arrived. She was a charming woman, every one said so everywhere, and she charmed every one. In spite of this, or perhaps because of this, since fate is so perverse, she cared only for one man, and he was Major Vansithen. Had she been plain or stupid, this matter would have been intelligible to Kashmir. But she was a fair woman with very still grey eyes, the colour of a lake. Just before the light of the sun touches it, no man who had seen those eyes could later on explain what fashion of woman she was to look upon. The eyes dazzled him. Her own sex said that she was not bad looking, but spoiled by pretending to be so grave. And yet her gravity was natural. It was not her habit to smile. She merely went through life looking at those who passed, and the women objected while the men fell down and worshipped. She knows and is deeply sorry for the evil she has done to Kashmir, but Major Vansithen cannot understand why Mrs. Bolt does not drop in to afternoon tea at least 3 times a week. When there are only 2 women in one station, they ought to see a great deal of each other, says Major Vansithen. Long and long before ever Mrs. Vansithen came out of those faraway places where there is society and amusement, Curl had discovered that Mrs. Bolt was the one woman in the world for him, and you dare not blame them. Kashmir was as out of the world as heaven or the other place, and the Dosri hills kept their secret well. Bolt had no concern in the matter. He was in camp for a fortnight at a time. He was a hard, heavy man, and neither Mrs. Bolt nor Curl pitied him. They had all Kashmir and each other for their very, very own, and Kashmir was the Garden of Eden in those days. When Bolt returned from his wanderings, he would slap Curl between the shoulders and call him old fellow, and the 3 would dine together. Kashmir was happy then, when the judgment of God seemed almost as distant as Narkara or the railway that ran down to the sea. But the government sent Major Vansithen to Kashmir, and with him came his wife. The etiquette of Kashmir is much the same as that of a desert island. When a stranger is cast away, their all hands go down to the shore to make him welcome. Kashmir assembled at the masonry platform close to the Narkara road, and spread tea for the Vansithens. That ceremony was reckoned a formal call, and made them free of the station, its rights and privileges. When the Vansithens were settled down, they gave a tiny housewarming to all Kashmir, and that made Kashmir free of their house, according to the immemorial usage of the station. Then the rains came when no one could go into camp, and the Narkara road was washed away by the Kasson River, and in the cup-like pastures of Kashmir the cattle waded knee-deep. The clouds dropped down from the Dosri hills and covered everything. At the end of the rains, Bolt's manner toward his wife changed, and became demonstratively affectionate. They had been married 12 years, and the change startled Mrs. Bolt, who hated her husband with the hate of a woman who has met with nothing but kindness from her mate, and in the teeth of this kindness had done him a great wrong. Moreover, she had her own trouble to fight with, a watch to keep over her own property. Curl for 2 months The rains had hidden the Dosery hills and many other things besides, but when they lifted they showed Mrs. Bolt that her man among men her Tedfer, she called him Ted in the old days, when Bolt was out of earshot was, slipping the links of the allegiance. The Vansithen woman has taken him, Mrs. Bolt said to herself, and when Bolt was away wept over her belief in the face of the over-vehement blandishments of Ted's sorrow in Kashima, is as fortunate as love, because there is nothing to weaken it save the flight of time. Mrs. Bolt had never breathed her suspicion to Curl, because she was not certain, and her nature led her to be very certain, before she took steps in any direction. That is why she behaved as she Roman 999. Bolt came into the house one evening, and leaned against the doorposts of the drawing-room chewing his moustache. Mrs. Bolt was putting some flowers into a vase. There is a pretense of civilization, even in Kashima. "Little woman," said Bolt quietly, "do you care for me?" "Immensely," said she with a laugh. "Can you ask it?" "But I am serious," said Bolt. "Do you care for me?" Mrs. Bolt dropped the flowers and turned round quickly. "Do you want an honest answer?" "Yes, I've asked for it." Mrs. Bolt spoke in a low, even voice for 5 minutes very distinctly, that there might be no misunderstanding her meaning. When Samson broke the pillars of Gaza, he did a little thing, and one not to be compared to the deliberate pulling down of a woman's homestead about her own ears. There was no wise female friend to advise Mrs. Bolt, the singularly cautious wife, to hold her hand. She struck at Bolt's heart because her own was sick with suspicion of Curl, and worn out with the long strain of watching alone through the rains. There was no plan or purpose in her speaking. The sentences made themselves, and Bolt listened leaning against the doorpost with his hands in his pockets when all was over, and Mrs. Bolt began to breathe through her nose before breaking out into tears. He laughed and stared straight in front of him at the Dosery hills. "Is that all?" he said. "Thanks, I only wanted to know you know." "What are you going to do?" said the woman between her sobs. "Do nothing. What should I do? Kill Curl, or send you home, or apply for leave to get a divorce? It's 2 days back into Narkara." He laughed again, and went on. "I'll tell you what you can do. You can ask Curl to dinner tomorrow on Thursday. That will allow you time to pack and you can bolt with him. I give you my word I won't fall." He took up his helmet and went out of the room, and Mrs. Bolt sat till the moonlight streaked the floor, thinking and thinking and thinking. She had done her best upon the spur of the moment to pull the house down, but it would not fall. Moreover, she could not understand her husband, and she was afraid then the folly of her useless truthfulness struck her, and she was ashamed to write to Curl saying, "I have gone mad, and told everything. My husband says that I am free to elope with you, get a dack for Thursday, and we will fly after dinner." There was a cold-bloodedness about that procedure which did not appeal to her, so she sat still in her own house and thought. At dinner-time Bolt came back from his walk white and worn and haggard, and the woman was touched at his distress. As the evening wore on she muttered some expression of sorrow, something approaching to contrition. Bolt came out of a brown study and said, "Oh, that I wasn't thinking about that. By the way, what does Curl say to the elopement?" "I haven't seen him," said Mrs. Bolt. "Good God, is that all?" But Bolt was not listening, and her sentence ended in a gulp. The next day brought no comfort to Mrs. Bolt, for Curl did not appear, and the new life that she, in the 5 minutes' madness of the previous evening, had hoped to build out of the ruins of the old, seemed to be no nearer. Bolt ate his breakfast, advised her to see her Arab pony fed in the veranda, and went out. The morning wore through, and at midday the tension became unendurable. Mrs. Bolt could not cry. She had finished her crying in the night, and now she did not want to be left alone. Perhaps the Vansithen woman would talk to her, and since talking opens the heart, perhaps there might be some comfort to be found in her company. She was the only other woman in the station. In Kashima there are no regular calling hours. Everyone can drop in upon everyone else at pleasure. Mrs. Bolt put on a big Turai hat and walked across to the Vansithen's house to borrow last week's Queen. The 2 compounds touched, and instead of going up the drive she crossed through the gap in the cactus hedge, entering the house from the back. As she passed through the dining-room she heard behind the purdah that cloaked the drawing-room door her husband's voice, saying, "But on my honor, on my soul and honor, I tell you she doesn't care for me. She told me so last night. I would have told you then if Vansithen hadn't been with you. If it is for her sake that you'll have nothing to say to me, you can make your mind easy. It's Curl." "What?" said Mrs. Vansithen with an hysterical little laugh. "Curl? Oh, it can't be. You two must have made some horrible mistake. Perhaps you lost your temper, or misunderstood, or something. Things can't be as wrong as you say." Mrs. Vansithen had shifted her defense to avoid the man's pleading, and was desperately trying to keep him to a side issue. "There must be some mistake," she insisted, and it can be all put right again." Bolt laughed grimly. "It can't be Captain Curl. He told me that he had never taken the least interest in your wife, Mr. Bolt. Oh, do listen. He said he had not, he swore he had not," said Mrs. Vansithen. The purdah rustled, and the speech was cut short by the entry of a little thin woman with big rings round her eyes. Mrs. Vansithen stood up with a gasp. "What was that you said?" asked Mrs. Bolt. "Never mind that man. What did Ted say to you? What did he say to you? What did he say to you?" Mrs. Vansithen sat down helplessly on the sofa, overborne by the trouble of her questioner. "He said I can't remember exactly what he said, but I understood him to say that. But really, Mrs. Bolt, isn't it rather a strange question?" "Will you tell me what he said?" repeated Mrs. Bolt. "Even a tiger will fly before a bear robbed of her whelps, and Mrs. Vansithen was only an ordinarily good woman," she began in a sort of desperation. "Well, he said that he never cared for you at all, and of course, there was not the least reason why he should have, and that was all." "You said he swore he had not cared for me, was that true?" "Yes," said Mrs. Vansithen very softly. Mrs. Bolt wavered for an instant where she stood, and then fell forward fainting. "What did I tell you?" said Bolt, as though the conversation had been unbroken. "You can see for yourself. She cares for him." The light began to break into his dull mind, and he went on. "And what was he saying to you?" But Mrs. Vansithen, with no heart for explanations or impassioned protestations, was kneeling over Mrs. Bolt. "Oh, you brute," she cried, "are all men like this? Help me to get her into my room, and her face is cut against the table. Oh, will you be quiet, and help me to carry her? I hate you, and I hate Captain K. Lift her up carefully, and no go away." Bolt carried his wife into Mrs. Vansithen's bedroom, and departed before the storm of that lady's wrath, and disgust impenitent and burning with jealousy. Curl had been making love to Mrs. Vansithen would do Vansithen as great a wrong as he had done Bolt, who caught himself considering whether Mrs. Vansithen would faint if she discovered that the man she loved had forsworn her. In the middle of these meditations, Curl came cantering along the road, and pulled up with a cheery "Good mornin', been mashing Mrs. Vansithen as usual, a bad thing for a sober married man, that what will Mrs. Bolt say?" Bolt raised his head and said slowly, "Oh, you liar." Curl's face changed. "What's that?" he asked quickly. "Nothing much," said Bolt. "Has my wife told you that you two are free to go off whenever you please? She has been good enough to explain the situation to me. You've been a true friend to me, Curl, old man, haven't you?" Curl groaned and tried to frame some sort of idiotic sentence about being willing to give satisfaction, but his interest in the woman was dead, had died out in the rains, and mentally he was abusing her for her amazing indiscretion. It would have been so easy to have broken off the thing gently, and by degrees, and now he was saddled with Bolt's voice, recalled him. "I don't think I should get any satisfaction from killing you, and I am pretty sure you'd get none from killing me." Then, in a querulous tone, ludicrously disproportioned to his wrongs, Bolt added, "Seems rather a pity that you haven't the decency to keep to the woman now you've got her. You've been a true friend to her too, haven't you?" Curl stared long and gravely. The situation was getting beyond him. "What do you mean?" he said. Bolt answered more to himself than the questioner. "My wife came over to Mrs. Vansithen's just now, and it seems you'd been telling Mrs. Vansithen that you'd never cared for Emma. I suppose you lied as usual. What had Mrs. Vansithen to do with you, or you with her? Try to speak the truth for once in a way." Curl took the double insult without wincing, and replied by another question. "Go on, what happened?" "Emma fainted," said Bolt simply. "But look here, what had you been saying to Mrs. Vansithen?" Curl laughed. Mrs. Bolt had with unbridled tongue made havoc of his plans, and he could at least retaliate by hurting the man in whose eyes he was humiliated and shown dishonorable. Said to her, "What does a man tell a lie like that for? I suppose I said pretty much what you've said, unless I am a good deal mistaken." "I spoke the truth," said Bolt again, more to himself than Curl. "Emma told me she hated me. She has no right in me." "No, I suppose not. You're only her husband, and what did Mrs. Vansithen say after you had laid your disengaged heart at her feet?" Curl felt almost virtuous as he put the question. "I don't think that matters," Bolt replied, "and it doesn't concern you." "But it does, I tell you it does," began Curl shamelessly. The sentence was cut by a roar of laughter from Bolt's lips. Curl was silent for an instant, and then he too laughed long and loudly, rocking in his saddle. It was an unpleasant sound, mirthless mirth of these men on the long white line of the Narkara road. There were no strangers in Kashima, or they might have thought that captivity within the Dosari Hills had driven half the European population mad. The laughter ended abruptly, and Curl was the first to speak. "Well, what are you going to do?" Bolt looked up the road, and at the hills. "Nothing," said he quietly. "What's the use? It's too ghastly. For anything, we must let the old life go on. I can only call you a hound and a liar. And I can't go on calling you names forever besides, which I don't feel that I am much better. We can't get out of this place. What is there to do?" Curl looked round the rat pit of Kashima, and made no reply. The injured husband took up the wondrous tale. "Ride on and speak to Emma if you want to. God knows, I don't care what you do." He walked forward and left Curl gazing blankly after him. Curl did not ride on either to see Mrs. Bolt or Mrs. Vansithen. He sat in his saddle and thought while his pony grazed by the roadside. The whir of approaching wheels roused him. Mrs. Vansithen was driving home, Mrs. Bolt white and wan with a cut on her forehead. "Stop, please," said Mrs. Bolt. "I want to speak to Ted." Mrs. Vansithen obeyed, but as Mrs. Bolt leaned forward putting her hand upon the splashboard of the dog-cart, Curl spoke. "I've seen your husband, Mrs. Bolt." There was no necessity for any further explanation. The man's eyes were fixed not upon Mrs. Bolt, but her companion. Mrs. Bolt saw the look. "Speak to him," she pleaded, turning to the woman at her side. "Oh, speak to him. Tell him what you told me just now. Tell him you hate him. Tell him you hate him." She bent forward and wept bitterly, while the sighs impassive went forward to hold the horse. Mrs. Vansithen turned scarlet and dropped the reins. She wished to be no party to such unholy explanations. "I've nothing to do with it," she began coldly, but Mrs. Bolt's sobs overcame her, and she addressed herself to the man. "I don't know what I am to say, Captain Curl. I don't know what I can call you. I think you've behaved abominably," and she has cut her forehead terribly against the table. "It doesn't hurt. It isn't anything," said Mrs. Bolt feebly. "That doesn't matter. Tell him what you told me. Say you don't care for him. Oh, Ted, won't you believe her? Mrs. Bolt has made me understand that you were fond of her once upon a time," went on Mrs. Vansithen. "Well," said Curl brutally, "it seems to me that Mrs. Bolt had better be fond of her own husband first." "Stop," said Mrs. Vansithen, "hear me first. I don't care. I don't want to know anything about you and Mrs. Bolt. But I want you to know that I hate you, that I think you are a cur, and that I'll never speak to you again. Oh, I don't dare to say what I think of you. Yowman size Gora ko Jane do." "I want to speak to Ted," moaned Mrs. Bolt, but the dog-cart rattled on, and Curl was left on the road shamed and boiling with wrath against Mrs. Bolt. He waited till Mrs. Vansithen was driving back to her own house, and she, being freed from the embarrassment of Mrs. Bolt's presence, learned for the second time her opinion of himself and his actions. In the evenings, it was the wont of all Kashima to meet at the platform on the Narkara road, to drink tea and discuss the trivialities of the day. Major Vansithen and his wife found themselves alone at the gathering place for almost the first time in their remembrance, and the cheery Major, in the teeth of his wife's remarkably reasonable suggestion that the rest of the station might be sick, insisted upon driving round to the 2 bungalows and unearthing the population. "Sitting in the twilight," said he with great indignation to the Bolts. "That'll never do. Hang it all, we're one family here. You must come out, and so must Curl. Ill make him bring his banjo. So great is the power of honest simplicity and a good digestion over guilty consciences that all Kashima did turn out, even down to the banjo." And the Major embraced the company in one expansive grin. As he grinned, Mrs. Vansithen raised her eyes for an instant and looked at all Kashima. Her meaning was clear. Major Vansithen would never know anything. He was to be the outsider in that happy family whose cage was the Dosari Hills. "You're singing villainously out of tune, Curl," said the Major truthfully. "Pass me that banjo." And he sang in excruciating wise till the stars came out and all Kashima went to dinner. That was the beginning of the new life of Kashima's life that Mrs. Bolt made when her tongue was loosened in the twilight. Mrs. Vansithen has never told the Major, and since B insists upon keeping up a burdensome geniality, she has been compelled to break her vow of not speaking to Curl. This speech, which must of necessity preserve the semblance of politeness and interest, serves admirably to keep alive the flame of jealousy and dull hatred in Bolt's bosom, as it awakens the same passions in his wife's heart. Mrs. Bolt hates Mrs. Vansithen because she has taken Ted from her, and in some curious fashion hates her because Mrs. Vansithen, and here the wife's eyes see far more clearly than the husband's, detests Ted, and Ted, that gallant captain and honourable man, knows Now that it is possible to hate a woman once loved to the verge of wishing to silence her forever with blows above all, is he shocked that Mrs. Bolt cannot see the error of her ways? Bolt and he go out tiger shooting together in all friendship. Bolt has put their relationship on a most satisfactory footing. "You're a blackguard," he says to Curl, "and I've lost any self-respect I may ever have had. But when you're with me I can feel certain that you are not with Mrs. Vansithen, or making Emma miserable." Curl endures anything that Bolt may say to him. Sometimes they are away for 3 days together, and then the Major insists upon his wife going over to sit with Mrs. Bolt, although Mrs. Vansithen has repeatedly declared that she prefers her husband's company to any in the world. From the way in which she clings to him, she would certainly seem to be speaking the truth. But of course, as the Major says in A Little Station, we must all be friendly.